All right,
Brendan.
let's jump in. I'm sure people will keep coming, but um, really grateful that you're all here and know how busy everyone is. So want to be very respectful of your time and start on time and end on time. So um, thank you all for coming. We have an incredible guest. I'm grateful to you all for being here. I'm especially grateful to Sheila and Jake for hosting this, and to Catalina for joining to discussing all of the incredible work she's doing in the mayor's office. It means a lot that you're giving us your time. My name is Jeremy Robbins, and I have the privilege of serving as the executive director of the American Immigration Council, which is an incredible organization that I joined last October after spending more than a decade leading the new American economy, and which just merged with the council. For those who don't know us, the American Immigration Council was formed 35 years ago when all of the immigration lawyers in the country through AILA came together and basically said, this is crazy, right? Immigration is one of the greatest assets, the greatest asset our country has, and our system is fundamentally broken. And as all of the immigration lawyers in the country, not only do we know what's wrong with it, and not only do we know how to fix what's wrong with it, but we're located in every community in the country, which means that wherever it is politically most relevant, not only do we know the most compelling stories that are going to move the hearts and minds because they're our clients, the immigrants themselves, but we also know the companies that have the political power in all of those communities that care about immigration because we're representing them too. And we need to have more influence. And they started the American Immigration Council to be this hub of policy and advocacy and litigation and research to really leverage all the knowledge and power of all these immigration lawyers. And so we've been at the forefront of every fight since, and continue to be the driving force behind just about every big immigration issue you're reading about in the news. So we brought the lawsuits to end, some of the lawsuits to end the horrific family separation practice. We're working to resettle Afghan and soon be Ukrainian refugees. We're partnering with the White House and the State Department now to bring more of the leading STEM researchers from around the world to communities like Baltimore. And we're leading the charge to end the practice of putting immigrants in private prisons, just among some of the things we're working on now. And there are two guiding principles that drive all of our work and that are distinctly relevant to the conversation I think we're going to have today about Baltimore. First, in all of our work, we want to empower immigrants themselves and make sure they have a seat at the table, really leading their own destiny. And second, we want to help make communities they settle in more welcoming and help leaders like Catalina proactively adopt policies to support the immigrants who settle in places like Baltimore. So that's what we're going to discuss today. We promise to leave lots of time for questions so that this really can be a discussion. So let's jump in. Sheila, Jake, and Catalina each have incredible personal stories and wonderful perspectives to bring to this work. So before we do anything else, let's start with intros. And so Sheila, Jake, and Catalina, will you tell your own story and why you're here today and frame this conversation, please? Sheila, why don't you go first?
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Good morning, everybody. I'm truly honored and delighted to be here. Welcome, welcome. Thank you, Jeremy. That introduction about the council was very helpful. And he didn't share this with you, but he's the sort of the new baby in the council, having recently merged with the new American economy. And I hope we'll get a little bit of time to share that a little bit more in detail. And considering how new he is, he's just embraced it and running right along at 100 miles an hour to roll up his sleeves and get engaged with the American Immigration Council's agenda and merging that with the new American economy. By way of background, like many of our clients, I am an immigrant. In my case, I was born in India and came here to do my law school as a full-grown adult. And for those of you who are not very familiar with Asian countries and cultures, if you're not a doctor or an engineer, you're a nobody. And so when I say I'm doing law, they're like, why are you wasting your time? And how are you going to feed the family? But I was going to fight for justice for the underprivileged and the downtrodden. And I didn't care if I was hungry or a little poor, but if I was going to feed my soul, that felt like it was totally worth it. Then I come to America, this land that has great opportunities. And they say lawyers make a decent living. And I'm like, that's great. So now I can do more good, help others, truly make a difference in the lives of other people. I worked in large firms in New York and Baltimore, and then about 30 years ago, started my own firm. which I think even today is considered one of the world's most popular legal websites, because again, information is given with the idea of truly educating, empowering, and enlightening people. And then after September 11th, we started the Murthy Nayak Foundation to help empower others to pay it forward, like many immigrants who are so, so grateful to this wonderful, generous country, our adopted country, that opened up doors and opportunities for us. So the Murthy Nayak Foundation, of course, focuses on education, for immigrants, for women, for children, and to truly make an impact. And I know I'm going to get an opportunity, Jeremy, to share why I'm such a big fan and supporter of the council in a few moments. So let me then pass the baton, or pass the mic to Jacob, to Jake. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. It's great to see so many friends around the table here today. So I'm Jake Hsu. I'm the CEO of Catalyte, and we're a Baltimore-based tech company that uses data to discover high potential individuals from all walks of life who can become great software engineers, digital media planners, and tech professionals. Our approach to finding exceptional talent is based on 20 years of longitudinal outcome data, not human bias. So we're discovering people with remarkable raw potential, people who have fundamental aptitudes and attitudes that predict for success, and regardless of the education or lack thereof or work experience. So we don't care what you did in the past. We only focus on what you can do now and into the future. Sound familiar around immigration? Anyone can apply, taking this 2-hour online screening. And if you qualify, Catalyte is going to invest to reskill and upskill you into the careers of the future with leading employers all over the country, including hometown heroes here like T. Rowe Price, Rocket Docs, ProTennis, Fearless, and a number of companies here based in Baltimore who work with Catalyte to create these customized tech talent pipelines that are predictable, scalable, and affordable. And yes, I'm an immigrant myself to this country. So I came here from Taiwan in 1975, and I moved here to Baltimore about 5 years ago from Silicon Valley. And I guess I'll turn it over to Catalina now.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. I am Catalina Rodriguez Lima. I am the Director of the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs for the City of Baltimore. I am originally from Ecuador and moved to the United States in the year 2000 to go to school here. In 2011, I was hired by former Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake to be her Latino liaison, and quickly realized that the city really needed a cabinet level office to advocate for the well-being of immigrants in the city of Baltimore. In 2014, we founded the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs to, again, elevate the voices of immigrants at the highest levels of government. Since then, we have done a lot of initiatives that I'm happy to share with you later on. I'm grateful to the city that welcomed me in 2008 and embraced me. I think Baltimore is a very special city, and I'm just happy to be a resident and happy to be with you.
Love it. Love it. Thank you, Catalina. All right, Jake, let's dive in more to Baltimore. So why don't you kick us off? Talk us about your thoughts on how Baltimore is positioning itself to be a welcoming city, and how that is going to lend to really drawing in international talent and putting Baltimore on the map.
Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, so it's an honor for me today to be introducing this topic, right? So we're going to hear from a panel of experts about how smart, fair, and welcoming strategies for immigration can benefit all Marylanders and make Baltimore a hub for international talent. I wanted to start first, with Jeremy Robbins, right? So Jeremy and I met about 4 years ago through his leadership at the New American Economy. Right? And NAE, for those of you who aren't familiar with that organization, was a Bloomberg-backed nonprofit research organization, a think tank. And they got on my radar because they were funding a series of research pieces into Baltimore. I had actually moved to Baltimore about in 2017, right? So I was really just trying to understand what was happening in our city. And they were funding a series of research pieces around the impact that immigration was having on the city. Now, as a fellow Baltimorean, I think we all feel the pain that our city has been going through over the last 4 decades, right? It's frankly one of the reasons why I love this city is because we wear our problems on our sleeve, right? And we're determined and we're committed to overcoming them. But we also have a tendency to overlook the good news that's coming out of Baltimore, right? And there's a lot to be optimistic about. I mean, and some of this data is going to be a little dated because the last time NAE actually had done this research was pre-COVID. But did you know, like prior to COVID, immigrant entrepreneurs, right? People who came and started businesses in Baltimore grew by 18%, right, in just 1 year, right? I mean, Silicon Valley can't even post that kind of growth in entrepreneurship, right? And NAE's research report, actually showed that, immigrants were major consumers and had incredible spending power, right? That could power Baltimore businesses. You know, in 2017, I think the last time any measured this impact, Baltimore's immigrants held nearly $8.7 billion in spending power, which actually had increased $400 million from the prior year. But as we know, being optimistic isn't enough, right? There's still so much more that can still be done to reinforce this success. There's still so much that can be done to accelerate the goodness that we're starting to see in this particular segment of Baltimore. And I think that's what today's session is really about. So with that, let me turn it back over to Jeremy and ask him to talk a bit more about the roles, right, that the council plays in helping our city succeed.
Yeah, no, thank you, Jake. And I'll back up quickly to talk about the merger that she alluded to. And so 3 years ago, New American Economy started thinking about, what do we need? Like, this fight is getting harder, right? Immigrants are one of the greatest opportunities we have in America, but it's a really challenging political environment, right? People are getting more polarized. You look at the politics of the day, and the reality we kept coming back to is, when we would talk with our partners on the ground, it's hard. I mean, Catalina will talk about the work and how difficult it is to really support immigrants, and they needed a lot of things. And at New American Economy, we could give a lot of them, right? We had a research arm, we give them data. We had journalists, we could tell stories. We had a policy arm to help people with technical assistance on policy. But there are a lot of things we didn't have. We didn't have legal services to help people who needed legal services. And we didn't have the real advertising game, like to counter the narratives that people are hearing on things like Fox News. And so we set out to do what business would do, which is that you try and get scale, you try and get new tools. And we thought about mergers and ended up merging with the American Immigration Council, because together we would become an organization that both could bridge what all of the skills and the talents and the networks nationally, and really bring them locally to help communities like Baltimore. And so I'll tell you what that has meant and what it does mean. First, it's just understanding what's going on and telling that story. So like Jake said, we do a huge amount of research, and I'll put some of it in the chat in a second, about the impact immigrants are having. And then we have a team of journalists to tell that story. So we're placing op-eds and we're getting people out in the front, like, so that immigrants aren't in the shadow. They are front and center, showing that we're in this community together. We also tried to say, what are the actual things that Baltimore would need to do? And so we convened a group of the leading experts across immigration, across a bunch of fields, to come up with a cities index, where we use 58 different metrics to measure how the top cities in the country, the largest 100 cities in the country, were doing at integrating immigrants, right? Like, is it socioeconomically? Is it politically? Is it civically? There are all these ways that people, if they're going to be part of society, can succeed or not. And perhaps surprisingly, or perhaps not, Baltimore, since we started this 4 years ago, has always been near the top. This year, I think Baltimore is the 5th best city in the country. And they do that. It's not because it's perfect, but there's sort of 4 areas where I think Baltimore has really thrived by leaning in. One, and Catalina will speak to this, is really government leadership, right? There is an Office of Immigrant Affairs now, a cabinet level position, as she said, where Catalina can be there every day, no matter if COVID-19 hits. You have someone in the mayor's office just thinking, all right, what does our immigrant community need? They're not going to be eligible. Many immigrants aren't going to be eligible for federal benefits, or if they're going to need to use services, do we have a hotline in multiple languages? Baltimore, they have a multicultural advisory council. They're participating in programs to attract immigrants. So there's a lot of leadership at the government level. There's also direct legal support, right? Baltimore is one of the few places that has publicly funded legal aid for immigrants facing deportation. Baltimore accepts consular IDs and other foreign IDs as a form of identification. And so you think about, if you're coming to a new community, what do you need to be able to thrive? And Baltimore's really leaned into doing that. And that has had a real impact when you look at things like socioeconomic success. So Baltimore actually has lower level of disparities between immigrants and the US born in terms of how much they're making. And I think part of that is because the native born income is somewhat lower in Baltimore than a lot of other cities. But part of it is also just because the reality of the city itself. Housing is a big one. The number of percent of immigrants that are rent overburdened or live in overcrowded housing in Baltimore is actually lower than most cities in the country. And so it positions Baltimore to be an attractive place for immigrants to come. And so that's both an opportunity and a challenge. And I think with real government leadership like Catalina has, and with real support, which I think the council can provide, that's a huge opportunity for Baltimore.
Thanks, Jeremy. I'd like to now turn the discussion over to Catalina, right? I actually also first met Catalina about 5 years ago when I first came to Baltimore. I'd heard of her work through Welcoming America, a nonprofit that I was on the board of at the time that was making cities across the United States more welcoming to immigrants. And Catalina's clearly held an important role in our city across multiple administrations now, right? Working through the mayor's office to make the city more welcoming. And as Jeremy had just mentioned, Baltimore, rarely are we ranked at the top of the league tables, right? When it comes to when it comes to measuring up with other cities. And as Jeremy mentioned, we're number 5 now, right? I'm the top 5 in terms of being one of the more welcoming cities in America. So, and one of the reasons I think, as Jeremy has laid out, right, is that immigrants to Baltimore have become integrated into the local economy and into the social fabric a lot faster and a lot better than in other places. And I think as a result, we've seen that all the residents sort of share those benefits. So Catalina is going to share some of the important things that the city is doing and continues to do to make this to make us welcoming to immigrants. I think she's also going to share how well we're doing relative to other cities across the country and some of the strategies that she's seen there, who've also figured out that, again, being welcoming to immigrants can become a growth engine that can lift the boats of all citizens. So Catalina, over to you.
Thank you, Jake. And again, I want to thank the American Immigration Council for the opportunity to share our work today. And it's really exciting about the merge with the New American Economy. The New American Economy has been such a partner to me even before starting NEMA. In fact, they were part of the inspiration of developing this office to highlight how immigrants contribute to the economy of cities in our country. I'm really, really grateful for the research, which helps us make the case at a local level. And as Jeremy mentioned, the cities index has been really, really helpful in helping us think about immigration from a framework perspective. This framework is helpful to us because it provides a roadmap on national best practices or standards, but more importantly, the framework also evolves with the ongoing needs of the community, but also the realities of our country. I was actually filling out the cities index last week, and there were questions about emergency response, language access, public health, again, all because of the pandemic and how cities were able to respond to the needs of immigrants during a crisis such as COVID-19. So I'm going to share with you a quick PowerPoint where I will share my some of the work that we've done over the years. So just give me 1 second. And just if someone can let me know if you can see it. Great, perfect. So as I mentioned earlier, we were established in 2014, and our mission is to promote the community well-being, the economic growth, and integration of foreign-born individuals in the city of Baltimore. Our roles and responsibilities are to advise the mayor, cabinet, senior staff, again, really becoming the cabinet level office that is going to bring the voices of immigrants and refugees at the highest levels of government. We serve as a source of information. We take this role very serious because our folks are not reading the Baltimore Sun or watching WJC 13. We also serve as a source of information for city agencies on matters related to immigrants. We do a lot of communications and messaging, again, working with ethnic media and getting the message out to communities about the city's resources and strategies that we have. We also have a technical assistance role to work with city agencies on anything related with immigrants and refugees, from policy, outreach strategies, messaging, resources, best practices. For those who are from Baltimore, you know that the city of Baltimore is a city of neighborhoods, and a lot of the civic engagement is through neighborhood associations. Well, our folks are not necessarily in those platforms because of language barriers, because they may have multiple jobs, because they lack childcare. And so because of that, what we do is we meet communities where they are. So we work very closely with nonprofit organizations, ethnic civic groups, faith-based institutions, schools, ethnic media, and we really try to change the definition of community with city agencies to make sure that they're including all of the platforms where folks are likely convening. We also manage the city's language access program, which I'm going to talk in detail. And a lot of our work is also done in partnership with community groups such as the Baltimore City Hispanic Commission and MEMA's Community Advisory Board. We don't do things in a vacuum. We want to make sure that immigrants are guiding our work and are also holding us accountable. And then finally, we try to respond to the needs of immigrants based on changes at the federal level. So a little bit of information regarding demographics. The city of Baltimore has close to 50,000 foreign-born individuals. The majority of our foreign-born community comes from Latin America. Approximately 21,000 of them actually do not speak English. What I would say is that immigrants actually continue to move to the city of Baltimore. Every year we see an average of 2,000 to 3,000 individuals, immigrants moving to the city of Baltimore. And in fact, the latest census results indicated that the Hispanic community in particular grew 80% since 2010. Although all Hispanics are not immigrants, we suspect that the majority of those are likely to be foreign-born because the current Hispanic population in the city of Baltimore is majority foreign-born. This is a photo of our community advisory board. As Jeremy mentioned, we do have an arm to make sure that they're holding us accountable. This group is comprised of members of the community that represent various languages and various ethnicities. And they have been really helpful to serve as a tentacle out in the community, but also to guide the work that we're doing on an ongoing basis. Consistent with our mission, our work focuses on 3 buckets: economic growth, community well-being, and government accessibility. So a lot of our strategies are based around these topics. Something that's important to highlight is that we're not a service delivery agency or division. Sometimes that can be difficult for our constituents to understand. What we're trying to do is change systems, be the catalyst for improved services, be the convener, be the glue, but we don't do service delivery. So that's one thing that I wanted to clarify. So one example of our economic growth strategy, this was actually my first project when we established MEMA. Something that we realized is that we really needed to do more in terms of technical assistance and micro lending for business owners who had limited credit or no credit. So we actually ended up recruiting a nonprofit organization from Washington, DC called Latino Economic Development Center. This organization has been in Baltimore since 2015 and provided hundreds of loans in the city of Baltimore, also technical assistance. And more recently, the city has increased their investment to provide housing counseling services. This is important because 1 in 5 entrepreneurs is an immigrant in the city of Baltimore. They play a really critical role during the pandemic in helping get government loans out to business owners in need of assistance, and they continue to be a partner to the city of Baltimore. Another example of our economic growth strategy is we actually manage a refugee employment grant that provides vocational training for refugees in the city of Baltimore. As you may or may not know, Baltimore welcomes approximately 800 refugees per year. This year, we're actually welcoming an additional 600 refugees from Afghanistan. This program actually helps them with vocational training classes, but also workforce development resources to get them employed in the city of Baltimore. An example of our community well-being strategy has been focused on making sure that our police department doesn't become an arm of ICE. So working on policies and strategies to ensure that they're accepting consular IDs, passports as a form of identification, also making sure that our officers are not asking about immigration status. Another one of our strategies has been increasing the city's capacity as it relates to immigration legal services. As Jeremy mentioned, our city actually invests in universal representation, and we're one of 16 cities with a legal fund to support immigrants. This is actually done in partnership with philanthropy. Some of them are actually on this call, and nonprofit organizations that are delivering services on the ground. Similar to Latino Economic Development Center, we actually had to recruit a nonprofit organization to provide universal representation in the city of Baltimore because we didn't have one. So a lot of our work is understanding the needs, assessing the gaps, and focusing on that gap to increase capacity, whatever that is. And then an example of government accessibility, as I mentioned earlier, part of our role is to manage the city's language access program, which is responsible for working with city agents to ensure that they're complying with Title VI This means that they have a plan on how to work with people who can speak English. We've also centralized all of the services related to language access and making sure that they have access to translation, telephonic interpretation, on-site interpretation. As you may see, the city's top 5 languages in Baltimore are Spanish, Mandarin, French, Korean, and Arabic. Language access has been a staple in what makes a city welcoming or a jurisdiction welcoming. But during the pandemic, language access became a matter of life and death, in making sure that people had information in their language about what was happening with the pandemic and the crisis. So I'm going to pause here and shift to what has been a reality over the last 2 years. We actually had to shift our responsibilities to make sure that we were helping city agencies in responding to COVID. And what I would say is the years prior to COVID and the work that we had been doing in becoming the hub of information and resources to city agencies, centralizing our processes for language access, developing relationship with nonprofit organizations and community groups, making sure that we were working and establishing relationships with philanthropy. All of that really prepared us to the moment of COVID, which was very trying, I'm not gonna lie. But it was really great to see how all the efforts of the office translated into a better response from our end to make sure that we were getting to immigrants and that we were supporting them throughout one of the most challenging times that I've had in my professional experience. But some of the roles that we had, again, messaging, we were part of the city's Joint Information Center to make sure that information going out was curated and that it was translated into the city's 5 core languages. We also increase the number of information channels that we had going out to the community. Again, information was a matter of life and death at the time. We really doubled down on our role as a technical assistance provider as health and economic resources were being made available. We made sure that we were in every single conversation to make sure that there were no barriers related to language, ability to access technology, or immigrant status. And then finally, we established efforts to support immigrants who were excluded by the CARES Act and had no access to employment, unemployment insurance, or the stimulus check. And so we actually ended up setting up an emergency program called the Emergency Relief for Immigrant Families, which provided financial assistance for families who did not qualify for public benefits. And this was actually possible thanks to a funding collaborative that MEMA, along with the Strauss Foundation and Jane Blackstone Foundation, established right before COVID. And this actually served as a vehicle to raise money to support thousands of families who were excluded by the federal government. Our goal with this funding collaborative is that it can continue to serve as an arm to increase the capacity of local organizations supporting immigrants. So there's more to come on this. And I guess what I will say, I'll close by saying that what makes Baltimore welcoming, or the efforts in building a welcoming Baltimore, has been possible thanks to the number of partners from elected officials, government, community, philanthropy, the private sector, nonprofit organizations coming together towards a same goal of including new Americans as part of the fabric of the city. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Catalina. Why don't we do this? Why don't we go to Sheila, and then we can open this up for questions after her section. And so, yeah, thank you, Catalina, for this, for sharing the important work that you're doing and MEMA is doing. I'd like to now turn the spotlight over to Sheila Murthy. Right. So many of you on this call know Sheila. She's a civic leader. She's been serving on the boards of EMA, MICA, and a number of civic institutions. You also know Sheila to lead a very successful law practice. She's kind of shared that in her bio. But I want to just say, in the short time I've gotten to know her, she's someone who doesn't just talk about things. She actually puts things in motion. And she recently made a $1 million grant contribution to the council. So I'd like to turn this over to Sheila now. And as somebody who's been working in immigration for decades here in Baltimore, tell us about more. Why are you invested in the council's work?
Thank you so much, Jake, and thank you to each and every one of you for being here and for continuing to support, obviously, just by investing your time this morning and talking about putting your money where your mouth is. Jacob, I mean, I'm learning new things about your background and about Catalina. Oh my God, when Catalina was speaking about the impact of MEMA and the work in Baltimore, I'm like, wait, I've lived in Maryland, in Baltimore County and in the Baltimore area for over 30 years, and I did not realize the tremendous impact that MEMA has been having, of course, focusing on the city, but just incredible. And I'm wondering how many others in the Zoom call this morning were as ignorant as I was. I will shamelessly admit to my lack of knowledge. And the wonderful thing about such opportunities is where we cross-pollinate, exchange ideas, learn from each other, get energized and empowered by each other with such great ideas. So the question that I was asked, or the issue that I was asked to briefly address was, hey, so thank you, Jacob, for Jake for laying that. Yes, I did make a $1 million pledge to the foundation, to the American Immigration Council, and I see some of the fabulous, very, very well healed foundations here in this morning's Zoom call. And comparatively, our foundation is not, even hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, but we wanted to focus on areas, like I mentioned in my introduction, that I felt were more very targeted and consistent with what we wanted to focus on. And so when people say, so Sheila, why did the Murthy Nayak Foundation decide to support the American Immigration Council? I really thought about it yesterday. I was like, okay, so we did, of course, research on several other organizations, on which would most effectively be able to do certain things that would be long-term and strategic, tactical, and in every which way sort of make it almost like a 360-degree support for the immigrant community. And from my perspective, so let me give you, for many of you who may not be familiar with the American Immigration Council and its work, each year we have a competition across the United States for middle schoolers where they participate and they write about the topic of why I'm proud that America is a nation of immigrants. And the best part of this is not only does the middle schooler in a very impressionable age get involved and learn about this, but they then discuss it with their parents and grandparents. And so learn about their own history and then write about it and then share it with the class. And then of course there's national, and then then we invite the main winner to the annual gala. This year it's in New York City. So for all of you who are there, you're invited to attend. We'll talk about that hopefully briefly later. But basically, I'm convinced that if the American Immigration Council existed for the last 100 years, and had this competition, that several of our narrow-minded, anti-immigrant, xenophobic politicians wouldn't be how they feel, because they would have learned to appreciate and embrace the fact that America is a nation of immigrants and respect and appreciate their own parents and grandparents and their ancestors. Second, the American Immigration Council provides a lot of research and data to organizations, to think tanks, to the news media, and speaks on the subject to basically provide unbiased, valuable information. Third, they do the same thing, but with a focus for immigrants and immigration lawyers. And I feel the ripple effect is huge, because each of us as immigration lawyers, and I see several names here, Brenda Kelly and the others, each of us represents dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of people. And so the ripple effect, not just on families, but on future generations of America, happens because of the American Immigration Council and its very impactful work. Fourth, they actually provide guidance to nonprofit organizations, talking points. They get involved and they file amicus briefs when required to strengthen and support the arguments of other organizations. And finally, they actually directly sue, sometimes with other organizations or law firms, whether it's the Department of Homeland Security, USCIS, the Customs and Border Protection, when these federal government agencies are breaking the law, not following the statute, and not following their own regulations. So as I was thinking about it, I was like, well, what's not to love and embrace and respect and admire the work of the American Immigration Council, and by each of us supporting and embracing them and supporting them. And again, it can be time, talent, or treasure, right? If we can do that, then we are honoring our parents and our ancestors and their struggle to come to this new foreign land and continue to pave the way and pay it forward for others. So I know I can go on because I obviously have a deep love and respect, and I was there at the very beginning and a trustee 15, 20 years ago, and you can see I have a huge appreciation, regard, and respect for the impactful work of the council. But I am going to hand it back to Jake so that we can continue the conversation of why Baltimore, why Immigration Council, and why are all of us here this morning. And I think we're going to open it for questions, but Jake.
Yeah, thank you, Sheila. And so as I mentioned at the outset, as we're going to start going into the Q&A session here, we have much to be optimistic about, right? We also have a lot that can and should still be done, right? But I also think right now, and I think both Jeremy and Catalina and Sheila have mentioned this, we have an incredible opportunity in front of us right now, right? We know that Baltimore is a national leader in healthcare and education, and we're all sitting in the midst of this great resignation that's happening. Right now, there's a 30-to-1 demand to supply imbalance in healthcare, right? For every 30 open positions, there's one person that's qualified, right? And even before COVID, 26% of all healthcare workers are immigrants, right? A third of doctors and surgeons in Maryland are immigrants. 29% of lab technicians and clinicians are immigrants. 27% of nurses are immigrants. So there's a tremendous opportunity right now to power the future of the American economy right here from Baltimore and Maryland. So with that being said, let's open this up to any questions from our participants.
Randy Johnson
and Bob both want to speak.
Go ahead, whoever it is that this is Johnson.
Yeah, Randy Johnson. Hey, sorry to jump in here, but Catalina, I'm a big fan of Baltimore. I haven't gone to law school there, clerked on the Supreme Bench of Baltimore City, and I'm also a member of LIRS, which is on 10 Light Street there, board of directors. So a couple questions. One is, as Jeremy knows, when we did comprehensive immigration reform, it was sometimes brought up a conflict between the African-American community and immigrants in terms of competition for jobs. And at the top line, of course, people denied that, but below the top line, I think certainly the Republicans made some hay out of that. I'm just curious, Baltimore, of course, has high unemployment among the minority community. Howard Street has a long ways to come back despite the redevelopment of the Inner Harbor. What's really kind of going on in there? Do you catch any conflict or not? Or between, who this is all plays into who's competing for jobs, particularly at the lower skill levels, and how do you handle that? Or am I seeing ghosts and there aren't any there to really see?
Yeah, thank you for your question. What I would say is from our perspective, from the MEMA perspective, everything that we do, our strategies are to improve the lives of immigrants, but also residents overall. I think one of the examples is like our efforts in increasing micro lending and technical assistance for business owners. When we recruited Latino Economic Development Center at the time, I saw a gap for immigrants who didn't have access to those resources for a range of reasons. What I did not realize at the time is that I was actually fulfilling a need for the African-American community entrepreneurs as well. And so today's LEDC's portfolio, about 35% of it is actually of African-American business owners who are not able to go to financial institutions. So my message to people out there is like, whatever we do to improve systems or resources that can benefit immigrants is often likely to benefit other vulnerable communities that are likely to be impacted by the same issues. This was the same case during COVID, where as we were curating messaging going out into the community, we were trying to simplify messaging to immigrants, but also other communities who have low literacy levels. So the work that we do is not necessarily geared only to immigrants, but any other community who's facing similar challenges or barriers.
Okay.
I'll just add to that quickly before we turn to you, Bob, and I'll say, Randy, it's great to see you. For everyone else, I'll say when I went to work for Mike Bloomberg 12 years ago, and was going to go work on immigration and didn't know the first thing about it, I asked a bunch of people, like, all right, I need to learn quickly. Who should I call? And I called a few people, but one of the first people who took my call was Randy Johnson when he was at the chamber, and so I've had the pleasure of knowing and working with him for a decade. Yeah, and look, Randy, I mean, I think your question gets at a few things, and Catalina's response too, which is there can be a real tension between groups, right? And one of the things when we think about what we have to do on immigration policy in this country is it's not just about providing direct services. It really is about really getting people to understand and believe that we're all in it together. One of the crazy realities about America right now is that only 1/3 of Americans actually know an immigrant, which is an insane number when you think about it, because in some places, lots of people know immigrants, and which means that in a lot of places, no one does. And so if you think of your community as only people who look like you, immigration seems really, really scary. And I think that's something that's been leveraged over and over again in our country. And so I think some of our work when we think about this is we have to be able to pair like real direct services to communities in need with a lot of work on belonging and really showing people who is in their community. And so when I think about some of the work that people like Catalina are doing and that we're supporting around the country, like, yes, like legal services, help getting citizenship, like those are fundamentally important things. You know what I think is equally, if not more important, are things like putting more immigrants on community boards, like really figuring out how you de-silo communities and make sure that people see and interact on a daily basis. And I think that's really hard work. It's really important work, and it's work that I think leaders on this call will play a really profound role in. And so I do think that is, when you think about the opportunity for immigration in Baltimore, it's not just about immigrants. It really is about creating structures and opportunities that you are lifting all boats and that you are really focusing on all populations and making sure that people are together. And so that's hard work, but super, super important work, and work that Catalina and her office have been doing fabulously well.
Yeah, Jeremy, I just think it gets swept under the rug a lot. So I'm glad we'd had a little discussion about it and got it out in front. Thanks.
Yeah,
thank you.
No, it's a great question.
Bob?
I'm not quite clear the purpose of this gathering, but if it's to be familiar with the national organization and its work and raise money for it, that's obviously a important and legitimate concern. That's not our concern. Our foundation is focused on the city. If it's to familiarize the audience with the value of immigrants to our country, I assume everybody on the call accepts that as a self-evident proposition. If the third is to let the audience know about what Baltimore City is doing to address the issues of the immigrant population, I think that's obviously a useful exercise. But if where our interest is, the thought is, how do we attract more immigrants to the city? Is there something we could do? Now, we put out a report in 2002 about the value of immigrants to particularly troubled cities, because Baltimore, obviously, its population grew over the centuries from Irish immigration in the middle 1820s, 30s, and 40s, and 50s, and then the Polish, Italian, Jewish, German, Italian immigrants, and then the African-American immigrants, domestic immigrants from the south to the north, led to Baltimore growing to 960,000 people. And our population has declined in part because the immigration stream has stopped or stopped up until recent years, and isn't nearly as robust as it might be. And other cities that have seen a growth in population, similar to Baltimore, have seen a growth in their immigrant population. So our question was, what can Baltimore do to attract more immigrants? So if the city's representative, which I think came about in part because of our report in 2014, our second report, has a need, we fund legal service to immigrant, we fund Hispanic entrepreneurship, and dealing with traumatized, largely women who come to the United States, from other countries. But if there are things that either more is needed for some specific intervention or some intervention is needed that doesn't exist, we would be very interested in knowing what that is. So I don't mean to filibuster, but at least from our point of view.
Well, Catalina, why don't you go first, and then I'll
Yeah.
follow.
But thank you, Bob, and thank you for the support from the foundation. As Bob mentioned, our office, when it was established, we had a report called The Role of Immigrants in Growing Baltimore, funded by the ABLE Foundation. So thank you for your support then. Thank you for your support over the last few years with any strategy that we've done. You know, attracting immigrants to any city, including Baltimore City, is dictated by networks of immigrants. So people are going to move based on friends and family, but in deciding where to go, those networks can be very powerful in dictating where people are going to go. The other way that we can make Baltimore a more welcoming city is giving reasons to stay in the city of Baltimore. So not just attracting them, which we don't have a problem of attracting immigrants. As I mentioned earlier, every year we have 2,000 to 3,000 immigrants moving into the city of Baltimore. And our Asian and Hispanic populations have really grown over the last 10 years. I think the challenge that we have is retaining people in the city. And the only way that we can address that is by providing reasons for people to stay here. And so things like services to open a business, to be here. Like if they can do that in the city of Baltimore, they'll do that. Opportunities to help them buy homes, opportunities to find employment. So again, reasons for people to stay in the city and remain in the city are important. The role of our schools and whether they're welcoming and have ESL programs to make sure that children are successful in their academics. The pieces that we have not had the bandwidth, frankly, because of the last two pandemics, one, the Trump administration, and now COVID, we haven't really had the space to think beyond a crisis, where we could think about home ownership strategies that target immigrants who are living here, or strategies around international students who are coming to the city of Baltimore and could be paired with sponsors. Quite frankly, over the last 6 years, 7 years, between the Trump administration and the COVID pandemic, it's been difficult for us to have the space to think beyond a crisis mode. But what I believe is that the networks are really powerful if we can retain a network of immigrants or an ethnic enclave that could serve as ambassadors and attractors of other communities is very critical. And the way to do that is to give immigrants reasons to stay in our city.
I think that's a fabulous answer, and Bob, it's a great question, and to your lead about what the purpose of the call is, that is the purpose of this call, right? Is how do we, to Catalina's thing, like if you're going fire to fire, she is incredibly talented. The office is doing great things. This is not a silver bullet type of problem, right? This is an all hands on deck type of problem, and it requires getting more leaders involved, not just with money, but with their networks, with talent, with working in schools, working in through employment, making sure people when they come can recertify if they're professionals, can recertify their degree, and language access, legal services, and so so the purpose of this call is how do we bring leaders together to deepen that investment in Baltimore? And I think certainly from American Immigration Council, I think we're a part of that. So yes, do we of course want to raise money to further that work, but we want that investments to be very hyper local. And so one of the programs that we run, directly to your point, was we run something called Gateways for Growth. And Gateways for Growth is something we do with a group called Welcoming America. It's a challenge grant program. And communities apply to us and we say, look, you should apply, but you can only apply if you get your private sector and your public sector and your nonprofit sector together, right? At the end of the day, like this is all going to be locally led. We want you to say that you are going to make these deep investments, and then we're going to help you do that. We're going to give you research, we're going to give you technical assistance, we're going to help you get funding. And then we create a community where communities learn from each other, right? This is not a unique Baltimore problem of saying we want to drive growth, we want to bring in talented people, we want to invest in having a diverse and dynamic and resilient population. And so because we're now in 100 communities, and I'll put the Gateways for Growth into the chat, you can look at exactly what other communities have come. I mean, when communities apply, we convene them, we bring them together. But even for anyone, you can look and say, oh, wow, look at this, what the welcoming plan that Kansas City wrote, and you can read it, or here's how they set up an Office of New Americans here, and you can read it. And so really trying to figure out how do we bring the learning so that every city like Baltimore is not trying to remake the wheel and come up with their own strategies whole cloth. But you can really learn like what's worked in other cities. Is it real services to attract immigrant entrepreneurs? Is it putting resource centers directly into immigrant neighborhoods so that people have it when they come here, like Salt Lake City did? Is it funding for legal services? And so I think those are things we want to support and help people do. And I think but again, like it can't all be on Catalina's shoulders, right? It really does require a deep investment from a broad section of local leaders.
And if I could just add to what I guess both Catalina and Jeremy just said to Bob's very thoughtful and provocative question, as usual, is in addition to the three very laudable goals, it's kind of because the new American economy was much more engaged in the local communities, and now with the merger is planning to continue that city by city, as Jeremy just explained. So we are talking both big global picture and in each community, and that's where Baltimore City and Baltimore's problems will be given the national attention and focus. And so that's where I guess based on what Jeremy just explained about how other foundations like the Able Foundation and other foundations can continue. I know the Able Foundation's focus is Baltimore, but so the part that where the Council/New American Economy are focused in the Baltimore piece of that puzzle, that's where I guess we could continue to build on those investments in not just money, but in every angle and in every different way that we can approach it. Did I say that right, Jeremy? I didn't want to, or maybe I'm.
No, that was excellent, and I know we're running short on time, and I think one of the things we believe very strongly in at the American Immigration Council is we're going to get people out on time. So I promise we will end there, and I don't want to ignore. And Jake, I'm sorry to steal the mic for a second, but Bob Cullen, Sheila, put a question in the chat just for you. In looking back on your career on behalf of immigrants to date, what do you consider to be your biggest successes and most fulfilling moments?
Wow. That's a deep and heavy question. How many weeks or months can I think about it? No kidding. Jokes aside, you know, I always the best moments are when we can impact and touch other human beings, change lives, and then have that ripple effect where the 1 + 1 can become 3. And so to me, the fact that each one of us is willing to invest time and really make a difference, and the fact that we care. I often say this, teach my staff this statement, right? I don't care how much you know unless I know how much you care. And we can't teach care. Care comes from heart and empathy and compassion and love, supporting each other. And so I think some of the best things are where we have impacted and touched each other, where we continue to make a difference. Because as I remember reading, right, we come with nothing into this world, we leave with nothing except the good that we do and the goodness that continues after our time here. And so hopefully the biggest and the best accomplishment will be the lives that we've changed, the difference we have made in people, in communities, in neighborhoods, working together and getting inspired and committed and learning and exchanging and truly impacting others around us through one person, one family, one community, one nation, and one world. Thank you for this opportunity to share, Bob.
That's great. Betty put a question that I think is directed at me. I'll answer quickly, which is about Baltimore with retention, and that's data I can pull in and share with this group if it's helpful, and about contributions to the city as a whole. And so when we do research on the impact of immigrants, we look certainly at the impact on themselves, but also on the impact to the community at large. So what's the tax revenue that they're paying? How many businesses they started? At the state level, we can tell you how many people they're employing. We look at what industries they're working in, how those industries relate, and where shortages are. And so I think that is important research to do, and especially as we talk about this issue, things that we're investing deeper in. So we do that. If you go to Map the Impact off our website, you can look nationally, you can look in every city in the country, you can look in every congressional district, you can look in every county, you can look in every state, trying to really show the impact in a deep way of that immigrants are having. Oh, and there's a question was sent to me just quickly. I'll answer that about Maryland government, and I should have mentioned this. And so we at American Immigration Council also convene a network of governors called the ONA network, the Office of New Americans, where we have 14 state level sort of Catalina's counterparts at the state level, who we bring together to figure out, like, all right, how do we respond to COVID-19? How do we think about Afghan resettlement? And so one of the starting that office in Maryland was something that we were part of, and I think has been hugely important. Things about licensing requirements during COVID. How do we get more immigrant doctors on the front line who got their degrees elsewhere and haven't been able to practice yet? And I think that is one where you can absolutely lead. And so one of the things when the question is asked about, what about undocumented immigrants and people whose applications are pending? There's a huge problem right now. And this is why I think this partnership of the local and national is necessary, is that there's a lot you can do locally, but there's a lot that really does require national action, right? The backlogs are getting longer under Biden, not shorter, despite their best efforts. Efforts to help dreamers, to help undocumented immigrants generally are stalled in Congress. And so our theory of the case is that this requires building ground up, that if we can really empower communities like Baltimore and do this all over the country at scale, then we can have the organizing network we need to change. So again, like to Bob's question, sort of what's the point and I want to make sure we leave everyone with some really concrete things of what to do next. And really with the message of this is a hugely important issue. It matters to every single person in Baltimore. And to really leverage the opportunity of immigration, it's going to require a lot of personal time and investment. So there's sort of three things. One is you have to be an advocate. And so would love to meet with each of you and really think about what that means, whether it's writing op-eds, whether it's meeting with your members of Congress, whether it's meeting locally, whether it's sitting on advisory boards for Catalina and others. You really need to speak up, and everyone thinks, well, what about me? Why me? You need a groundswell of movement of people who care about this issue, who are keeping it at the top of the agenda. So that's one. Two is you have networks. So you need to organize. Think about who are the people, and again, we'll follow up with each of you to if you're willing to get coffee and start thinking this through of like, who are the other leaders when you think about what do immigrants need in Baltimore, housing, legal assistance, English, who are the other leaders who can help us do that? And the three is you need to invest. And of course, to Bob's point, yes, like this work is expensive, it's hard. We hope you invest in us, but I hope you invest in Catalina's work. I hope you invest in really local organizations that are doing it. But this is a moment where it is a deeply underinvested field, and it requires leaders to speak up and show that it matters. So I do hope you'll get involved. We are at 11. I will end by just saying again, thank you to Jake, to Sheila and Catalina, and for all of their leadership. And really thank you to all of you who took an hour in the middle of a day when we know you're busy. And so I'm excited about this work. I'm excited about what you are doing, and so eager to get to know all of you more. Any last words?
Thank you all very much. Have a great day. Good weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Well done.
Thank you. Goodbye.